A huge win for religious liberty as the Supreme Court is absolutely ripping apart woke leftist America. It's absolutely amazing. We're going to take a look at the latest victory for conservatives handed down by the Supreme Court. We're going to see how it actually restores the traditional relationship between church and state. And make sure to stick me to the very end of this video when I'll reveal why we're seeing nothing less than the total unraveling of woke America. You are not going to want to miss this. Greetings, patriots all across the globe. Dr. Steve here with you. Great to be with you as always. I am your Patriot professor here to help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and clownish times. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. You know what else I want you to do. I want you to stick it to woke cancel culture by clicking on that link below and supporting our dear friend Mike Lindell and MyPillow. I'm sure you've all heard that Walmart stores have now canceled Mike's products from their shelves. And so let's show Mike some love as he shows it back to us. He's offering us his lowest prices ever with my code Turley. So for example, usually the classic MyPillow is $69.98, but now if you use my code Turley, you can get your own classic MyPillow for just $19.98, and that applies to over 200 products in their catalog. So don't wait. Click on that link below. Get one for yourself. Get another for the patriots in your life. Get one for a high school grad who's off to college. Let's support our fellow patriot Mike Lindell, and let's get the best sleep of our lives in the process. All right, gang, so let's dive right in here. It is being widely reported that as of this morning, the Supreme Court has handed down a huge verdict for religious liberty throughout our nation. Another 6-3 decision. The court officially affirmed that public school officials most certainly have a constitutional right to publicly pray on school grounds, as well as lead students in prayer during school events. It's an absolutely astonishing ruling, and it has meant, in many respects, it's restored corporate prayer back to our public schools. It all goes back to a high school football coach in the state of Washington by the name of Joe Kennedy. Coach Joe, who is a retired U.S. Marine, was the beloved football coach at Bremerton High School. And after watching the movie Facing the Giants, which is actually a very moving Christian film, I don't know how many of you have seen it, about overcoming adversity in the context of high school sports. Well, I'm sure many of you have seen it. It's a great movie. But after seeing that film, he was inspired to pray at their football game. So after their first game of the season, Coach Joe walked over to the 50-yard line and knelt down and began to pray. Now, at first, it was just Coach Joe himself, but then a number of players began to join him, which eventually grew to a majority of the team. So for 7 years, he did this, right? No issues. But then, in September 2015, in the Bremerton School District, they learned that he was doing this when an opposing team's coach told Bremerton High School's principal that Kennedy asked his players to join him for the post-game prayer, saying that he thought it was pretty cool the district would allow such activity, according to the court records. That observation by the opposing coach served as the catalyst for a years-long battle between Kennedy and the school district, which did eventually fire him for praying. Now, he obviously took them to court, and the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and boom, as of this morning, the court has ruled that Coach Joe's constitutional rights to free speech and the free exercise of religion were indeed violated by the school district. Now, obviously, this ruling is just astonishing given the series of victories that conservatives have been getting over the last week from the court. Talk about winning. I mean, Todd Starnes said it best, tweeting out, "The Supreme Court is now pro-God, pro-guns, and pro-babies. God bless America." And amen to that. And in many respects, what we're seeing here really is nothing less than the very real ripping apart of woke America. The Supreme Court is single-handedly crushing leftist America. So, for example, when Coach Joe's case finally reached the Supreme Court after his lawyers made their argument, the radically woke leftist activists over at Sports Illustrated, yes, the sports media is one of the most single woke leftist cesspools inside the legacy media, but they actually ran a hit piece against Coach Joe, claiming that were the Supreme Court to eventually decide in his favor, it would, quote, "it would be an erosion of the bedrock of American democracy." And of course, they're referring to this mythical notion of the separation between church and state. But again, what's so key here is you'll notice the continued redefinition of democracy is anything that benefits the radical woke left. Democracy is now, for the mainstream media, democracy is nothing more than a buzzword, a dog whistle, we might say, for the promotion of far leftist secular wokeism. That's why leftists are all freaking out today about the reversal of Roe v. Wade. I kid you not. They're freaking out as a thwarting of democracy. That's what the borderline illiterates over at the Brennan Center are actually publicly calling that decision. Here you have a ruling that expressly states that abortion is simply not in the Constitution. It is an issue that needs to therefore be settled through the legislative process, by the democratic process at the local and state levels. And according to the woke leftists like the ones at the Brennan Center, that is the thwarting of democracy. And it's a thwarting of democracy because democracy has been redefined. It's now a buzzword for anything that promotes radical left-wing activism. But the fact of the matter is that this so-called bedrock of American democracy, this mythical separation between church and state, never existed in our nation until left-wing radicals took over the courts. Historically, here in the States, the relationship between church and state has always been one known as an accommodationist relationship, where both church and state are seen as distinct and separate institutions, but who function together as a partnership in the betterment of society. Church and state work together so that the public square remains a space for the cultivation of what the founding fathers referred to as civic virtue. Civic virtue was considered indispensable to freedom because only a self-governing people could be truly free, and in order to be self-governing, we had to cultivate a sense of civic virtue. That's the view of literally every single founding father. But in order to cultivate virtue, you had to have faith. You had to have a faith tradition, which are the timeless sources of the classical virtues. But the only way you can have true faith is if you have freedom, right? That faith can't be imposed upon you from above. So this is very much like what Coach Joe Kennedy was doing. He's praying, and you can participate if you like. You don't have to. That's the freedom that undergirds true faith. But in order to have true freedom, you have got to have civic virtue, which requires faith, which requires freedom, which requires virtue, which requires faith. You see, there's an interlocking pattern here. This is what Os Guinness refers to as the golden triangle freedom. True freedom requires virtue, which requires religious faith, which requires freedom. So this triangle freedom is an interconnected whole where every part implies the others. And that, my friends, that golden triangle freedom, that is the true bedrock of our democracy, in stark contrast from what you're getting from these borderline illiterates over at Sports Illustrated. So what happened to this golden triangle of freedom? Well, I'm going to show you exactly what happened to it. But first, I did mention on last Friday's video that the premiere for our new movie, The Return of the American Patriot, The Rise of Pennsylvania, is coming up in a couple of weeks. And we've got an amazing opportunity for you for how you can support this documentary and actually get your name in the credits. Is that not cool? So I'm going to be revealing all of that tomorrow. So make sure to stay tuned. It's a really exciting opportunity. All right, so what happened to this accommodationist vision of church and state? Well, unfortunately, since more or less the early 1940s, leftists took control of the Supreme Court and began dismantling the accommodationist view of the relationship between church and state and replaced it with a radically secular notion of a separationist view. So they expelled faith institutions, particularly church, from the public realm and relocated the church solely in the private realm, where it loses the capacity to train citizens in virtue, since virtue requires truth and objective moral norms, and truth and objective moral norms collapse in the private realm of personal opinion and subjective sensibility. And as a result, the state began taking over all the social and institutional dimensions that were once under the custodial care of the church as the indispensable instrument of virtue formation. So when it came to the family or healthcare or education, particularly in terms of the curriculum and pedagogical practice or conflict resolution or whatever it was, the secular state became the final arbiter in all matters of demographic, economic, political, and social life. That is what the idiots at Sports Illustrated want you to think is the bedrock of democracy. But again, the good news here is that is the fact that a contradiction in the separationist view has begun to surface and has become widely recognized by the Supreme Court. And of course, that contradiction is the fact that the separationist view actually entails religious discrimination. Expelling and excluding institutions from public participation simply because they are, quote, religious is itself inescapably discriminating on religious grounds. The separationist paradigm is inescapably religious discrimination, and that, ironically, is exactly what the leftist lunatics over at Sports Illustrated are advocating. And so the Supreme Court has, for at least the last 5 years or so, they've been ruling in such a way so as to restore the accommodationist relationship between church and state, particularly going back to the Trinity Lutheran decision back in, I think, 2017. And so what we're seeing here really, I believe, is nothing less than the judicial bedrock, to continue to use that term. We're seeing the judicial bedrock being laid down that's doing nothing less than burying, perhaps permanently, woke America. Gun control is dead. Roe v. Wade is dead. Now a radical, secularized, separationist paradigm between church and state is dead. The woke world really is unraveling. It's falling apart right before our very eyes. So a huge congratulations to Coach Joe Kennedy. A huge win for him. A massive victory in restoring prayer in our schools. And a crushing defeat for woke leftists. A defeat that may last for generations to come. Now, before you go, you will definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on millions switching to the GOP as the Democrats are quite literally losing everything. You are not going to want to miss this, so make sure to click on that link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.